Hey guys, it's Matho here once again, and I've got a bit of a video on the character I've been playing for the past few days, that is Arc, Lash, and Ball Lightning Sorcerer, but I've also got a bunch of stuff to say about Sorcerer, so this video is going to be in two parts. The first part, basically, just going over what I've been doing with this character, what the character's like, and a full guide for it, essentially. And then the second part is going to be a rant about the Sorcerer, just as a class in Diablo 4, because I think there's definitely a few faults with it, especially compared to some of the other classes. So on a more lighter positive note to begin with, this is the Arc Lash Ball Lightning Sorc, and this is what most of my gameplay look like for about 70 levels. The gameplay really changes and gets quite revolutionized once you get the unique chess piece, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the idea of this build here is to basically revolve around cooldown reduction stacking and hopefully get your unstable currents, which is your ultimate that I'm pressing right now, to be pressed a lot. And when you press it, you use your basic attack Arc Lash, and that, if you have a lot of attack speed, it will help you trigger a lot of free random lightning spells. Once you get the unique chest, you can start teleporting, and all mobs around you are going to get sucked into your general area and stunned, and that quite revolutionizes your gameplay. Once we get enough cooldown reduction, you basically start spamming teleport. You're using unstable currents quite often, and in my case, I'm trying to proc Ball Lightning as much as possible, because that is what I've built into of all of the lightning skills, and we are using Arc Lash as a damage source as well. I think this is the most spammy damage number-wise build out there. Maybe Bloodlance is worse, but I don't know anything about that. I've just heard it crashes games or some shit. But from what I've played, I have not seen a build that has more number spam, and that is because Arc Lash hits, you pick up these things called Crackling Energy, which, as you can see just above my XP bar, are just lightning surge energy things that zap enemies, but are also used for procs and lucky hit and some kind of bullshit like that. This is just some normal gameplay in the background right now of what a Helltide kind of looks like. So those Crackling Energy do a bit of damage, but mostly for proc stuff. You also proc a Ball Lightning that you can see sitting around on the ground that zaps things. You then have Ball Lightnings of your own through unstable currents, and then a bunch of other skills. So it becomes very, very spammy. But the character levels as Chain Lightning for a while, and it's fine. It does well enough. You then go Arc Lash into a unstable current setup at around level 50, and it does okay as well. I run into plenty of problems with Sorcerer at that point, but it doesn't really matter. Still having kind of decent amount of fun, and trying to just build the character as well as possible. And then you get the unique chest on, and it does become a game changer. So if you're going to try and play something like this, keep in mind that the build, and I guess probably most Sorc builds, really take off once you get the unique chest. It smoothens out a lot of your gameplay, because having the monsters get grouped up pretty much always and stunned reliably is huge, and it makes the game a lot more fun for you, not gonna lie. But I did do well enough before that, wasn't too sad about my build. I just was aware that there was a chest out there that was going to change the game for me, and then eventually did, and yeah, feels a lot better. Gonna be playing this character for a bit, just try and enjoy it for what it's worth. The problems with the build are that it's just can be a bit squish. It's very cooldown reliant, as a lot of Sorc builds are, barriers and all that, and the single target is nothing too special, especially against things that can't get stunned reliably, and you're just basically working off of stagger. This is just a butcher I came across in the dungeon tier that I've been doing, which is about tier 30, and it's not great for single target, but as you can see, with enough barriers and with enough just cooldown sustain, we're not really taking damage. Damage is nothing too special of our own. We are entirely reliant on unstable currents to be popping off for our damage. So the idea is to definitely have various procs and cooldown reductions to have a very reliable ultimate coming up pretty much always. So that's pretty much all to say. I will now just go over the character real quick for you, everything about it, and what I've done so far. So here's the current Sorc Zap, the Drunken Fool, level 76. As far as my abilities are concerned, skill tree, basically that level with Chain Lightning. So you just grab Arc Lash into like Chain Lightning, spec full Chain Lightning, and then basically the rest of the build, as I've got it set up, is how you would play it, with no real emphasis on Ball Lightning yet. Chain Lightning starts to fall off around level 40 to 50 without any huge legendary enhancements, and that's around the time when your build starts to feel a bit slower, a bit weaker, and that's when I was hopefully well enough established with my entire setup, my bit of Paragon, some cooldown reduction, that I then went into full Arc Lash, and this build that you see here. I went into Ball Lightning and Unstable Currents. So the build revolves around going for Arc Lash. Arc Lash can give you some cooldown reduction when hitting stunned enemies. You then have the Unstable Currents, which procs lightning skills or storm skills when you attack, and just get a bunch of basic attack speed. Go ahead and Arc Lash some shit. Hopefully get your cooldown reduction down with also overflowing energy, and then hopefully you can spam your Unstable Currents a lot, but for the most part you can actually just kill things with Arc Lash. Once they're frozen, once they're stunned, it definitely works out well enough. Take a point in Flame Shield, in Teleport, in Ice Armor, in Frost Nova, basically just the stock standard Sorc setup. A few points in various shit, so for barriers, lucky hit chance there. We've got Glass Cannon over here, and also Devouring Blaze for crit damage against burning enemies. We got crit with shock skills, more crackling energy off of the lucky hit. Stun an enemy, deal some damage to them. And then down here we've got some worthless crit thing. Enemies deal less damage when crit, and some random stun as well. I actually used this thing for a long time until I was ready to go full into sort of cooldown reduction. I just went with this guy over here for a lot of the gameplay. But otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much the build. That's pretty much the setup. Very easy stuff, and just hopefully get your way towards some cooldown reduction and some basic attack speed. So the legendary powers that I've currently gone with are my Amulet having attack speed, but I might swap this around for something else with more damage. So the Amulet gives, you know, like either this stun power here for more damage or barrier more damage. Either way, currently got attack speed here. We've got Edge Masters for 20% more primary damage while primary resource is high. Given that in my build I use no primary resource, that's pretty comfortable, and it means I get a good bonus power for that always. Unstable Currents is not active. Your shock skills have a 10% chance to trigger a free cast from it, so it's basically like having Unstable Currents 10% of the time. So it just gives you a little bit of extra spice in your build when you're just arc lashing people for infinite amounts of time. Deal more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen. We've got the deal damage to stunned. We've got Flame Shield, lets you move unhindered, but also immobilizes people. So, you know, you can run over the top of them, immobilize them, and that helps with damage as well, and staggering. And then you have, or currently I've got here some armor. Got Ball Lightning orbits around you. Once you get this, that's basically when you can start doing a full Ball Lightning spec with the orbit of the Ball Lightning, because it'll then officially do some damage. You then have the chest itself, Raiment of the Infinite. Prior to this chest, I was just using a chest with a bit of defenses on it, but after using Teleport, close enemies are pulled to you and stunned for 2.6 seconds. Teleport cooldown goes up by a bit. With all of our other CDR reductions, Teleport does get lowered on its cooldown quite frequently, so that's not a big deal. But the stun, the pull, very important, very powerful in this build. And then basic skills grant 20 damage reduction. As far as stuff I'm looking for on the gear, basic attack speed, cooldown reduction. On this is currently life and armor. That thing, you know, can't do anything about. Just generic gloves, crit damage, lucky hit, crit attack speed. Bunch of generic, you know, damage reduction plus 4 to Ball Lightning. On your boots, you kind of want Teleport. and hopefully Ice Nova, Frost Nova, because levels in that do reduce their cooldown, and that helps you spam them away. Or you can go for the unique boots that give you crit on movement speed, but so far I'm doing this. I think it's a bit more worth it, and I haven't had a good pair of those boots. You're looking for int, stats, crit damage, close damage, lightning damage, fucking vulnerable damage. I haven't gone too hard on vulnerable damage because it is pretty situational, and we'll get into that in a sec. It's coming entirely from our Frost Nova, if you didn't know. Your focus should have cooldown reduction, hopefully some lucky hit, some attack speed, various other things, maybe some crit. Damage reduction from burn is pretty good too. Mine is currently pretty bad, but it's a high level, and that's basically why I've got it. Lucky hit, vulnerable, crit, close, crit lightning, life, all kinds of stuff you can do on rings. And then amulet can be a very interesting one. It's going to be pretty personal, up to what you can find, what you value. 3 to all mastery skills, so that's for my ball lightning. And then I rerolled to have something good, and ended up landing on 3 to devouring blaze, which is huge for critical strike damage multiplier. Cooldown reduction is going to be pretty important. You could go some armor, some other plus passives, movement speed, but we currently have a wasted dex roll. So that's currently what's happening there. As far as the Paragon is concerned, I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of this, but I'll get into this in a sec as far as Rant wise. What we have here is just going through this area. I've taken Tactician here, so deal 10% damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive. Just a couple of whatever nodes. This is a Paragon board for burning stuff, and we don't actually take legendary power here. We're just focused on taking some damage reduction, some increased damage to burning enemies, damage reduction from elites, and I was spec'd into this as well, damage reduction from burn, but I just then unspec'd it to test another Paragon board. We then have this one. Once again, don't need the mana, don't take the legendary. Currently using, I'm very early in my glyph stage. I'm going to experiment with some, but mastery skills, and going to gain mastery power off of that, which is once again the ball lightning. Barely doing anything here, pathing through damage to stunned. Another Paragon board. This is what I was experimenting with to see if crackling energy can do anything proper damage wise, and it kind of can, so I might keep it. At this stage it hits for like 10 or 15k, and it can kind of clear some piddly mobs, so maybe I'll hold on to it, but I'll do some more experimenting with that, and also the glyph for it. But that's where I'm at with Paragon, and the enchantments I'm using. So throughout most of the game, basically I was running Firebolt enchantment with Fireball. Fireball enchantment gives you this explosion, so when there's lots of pack size, it really overlaps hard and does feel pretty good. I got rid of that once I started to lean heavier into ball lightning and did it for single target, which is more like around level 60 or 70. So this carried me for a long time, and you do have to spec into these points to have them. You can also like spec heavier into them if you want it to do more. You can level harder into it, and also take the stuff behind it, but it's not very important. But yeah, that's basically it, and I just forgot to unspec that point, so we'll do that now, later. Anyway, so those are the enchantments, and there's not really too much flexibility there, but you can make some other choices like chilling things. With the chest now that we've got, you can teleport more with evade, but yeah, I'm currently valuing these two things, because the Firebolt thing lets you burn enemies, and that lets you have a whole nother source of scaling on your Paragon tree and your gear. So that's a character. I'm pretty happy with it, and it's going well, it's very fun, and it's still ramping. Now for the less good part. Sorc does feel, this is part 2 of the video, Sorc does feel pretty disjointed in this game as a class. And I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of problems and then like address them. So essentially it's cooldown reduction spam, it's got issues with vulnerability, its Paragon has issues, its gearing has issues, its uniques have issues, its main scaling system of int and resists have issues, the enchantment slots they have issues, lots of the skills have issues. Now, a lot of these things are basically universal for a lot of classes, but you don't feel them as much. I'll start with Paragons though, let's say. Because in most classes, once I've gotten to a high enough level and I've actually filled out at least one character's paragons all the way, you can feel the power and it does feel pretty damn good. And that meant that once I went to other class paragons, hit level 50, I got pretty excited to like see what power was there and what I can, you know, gain and spec into and specialize into. And I was pretty fucking disappointed looking at the Sorc paragons. So when I, looked at this shit, I'm like, okay, yep, some resists. We know resists are terrible, so that's a huge other problem. And that's most of what's on your board. So like most of the defensive nodes are just resists and even just single resists. So like you're going to, your resist node and it's like, what the fuck is that? Like 12 lightning res. And once you've got some res and you take a point into that, gives you like, half a point of damage reduction or some shit to one element. Whereas like a barbarian has this like armor across the board and it makes your character way, way thicker. But once we get to the board attachment gate thing, we start looking at our boards. Like every single thing I was reading, I was like, that's useless and it doesn't help me. That's useless, doesn't help me. That's so on and so forth. So like we have to take some burn scaling and then this thing's not going to do anything. And other than that, as a lightning build, like I can stun and do mana, but mana resource is terrible. That's another problem. Up until like level 60, you're constantly juggling your mana as a resource. And then once you've spec'd enough stuff, maybe you can get into decent enough mana generation, but it takes too long to get to that point. So anyway, since we're not based on mana, this thing's not going to do us much help, but you can definitely use it to like help mana. And then the only thing that's actually kind of useful for me is Ceaseless Conduit. But even then, I'm not sure it's actually worth it because these things fall off hard is what I'm told, and I'm only just now testing and it's not even that good. So most of the legendary powers suck, and then you're basically forced to just go for things on the board and glyph sockets and stuff. But most of it's not very good. It's very like specific to certain builds. Like we do have vulnerable one. That's one I'll probably end up doing as well. But they're mostly very specific to things and they aren't very powerful either. Like all of the defensive options are basically resists, and the glyph sockets and stuff aren't very good either. There's like some that I've been informed don't even work very well. So like you can't actually hit the cold one, wherever it is. In winter, I think it is, you can't actually like get any cold in this thing's radius or something, supposedly. I don't know. They're weak. Some of these are pretty weak. Like the other one that's supposed to be bad was Electrocute. But if I put it here, for example, it does at least buff my lightning res nodes by a teeny bit. But I'm not sure there's a zone for it to buff any lightning damage. Which, yeah, it has, buffs lightning damage, but it can't do that. So anyway, the paragons just felt terrible. Like I didn't know what to do because I didn't have any good choices, I felt. So that is largely as a result of like almost no armor on the tree. Like I had these armor nodes and I think that's all I could get. Beyond that, it's all just shitty res. So once res, let's say if res ever gets fixed as like a proper defensive scale, then maybe Sorc isn't in as much of a bad state on its Paragon board and its actual scaling system. So as you can see, like here, I've got 31 res for this much int, and it's just not very powerful. That's why you do feel kind of squishy and very reliant on cooldowns. So that's another problem. We end up feeling very, very reliant on cooldowns, and your best bet is to basically have a Diablo 3 style system where you are just trying your best to get lots of cooldown reduction so that you can spam all of these. But the main real issue with the cooldowns is, first of all, yep, everyone's doing the same thing because you kind of have to because you are tied to all of these defensives. But your main source of vulnerability is Frost Nova. You have to get your cooldown really low so that you can Frost Nova enemies for vulnerability, because vulnerability is like the main source of scaling in this game for big damage, and there's nothing else you can do about that. You just have to go Frost Nova, you have to go some cooldown, you have to try and get it to work, and you will be very conditionally tied in to small windows of damage here or there. So basically Sorc has very conditional power, situational stuff, so like percent chance to do stuff, percent chance to proc stuff, and then ultimately you're only doing damage to things if they're frozen stunned. And a lot of things can't be frozen stunned until they're staggered, for example, like bosses. And then a lot of things you're just not going to have the cooldown available for that. And without that, you're not doing very much damage. And there's just no other good way of getting vulnerable. So most other classes basically have a pretty reliable vulnerable generator that is applicable to almost all of their builds. Your glyph even here, exploit, like many others use, doesn't apply vulnerable in any way, it just increases the damage for it, so it is rough to like lean on that and use it. Yeah, so like if you look for vulnerable, there's not many options. It's basically all tied to cold stuff, and it's rough. Like you can go ice blades as well, and maybe I'll experiment with that, but then I have to sacrifice something else, and it's also a very small application of vulnerable. There, for another example of something stupid, you know, I'm a lightning Sorc and I care very much about stun. You can't even search for stun on this fucking tree because, you know, that's cool. Instead of being able to just search for it yourself, you can't actually, you know, they give you some stuff, there's no stun. So I don't even know where the stun is. But yeah, it exists, and you know, we do try and build around it, but stun as a mechanic here becomes pretty, well, conditional. So there are a lot of conditions. Things have to be burned, things have to be stunned, frozen, all of this shit, otherwise you're not doing much damage. And speaking of the burn thing, all Sorcs are basically tied to doing some level of burn because it's powerful as a extra scaling modifier. So your enchantments, like apparently you had 3 before, now we've only got 2. If you had a 3rd one back, maybe that would be a big help, but you are very tied to a certain couple at the moment, usually just like at least Firebolt, and you know, it may even be that you're tied to Frostbolt for chill scaling as well. But currently I have kind of like 1 flexible slot and I'm doing Ball Lightning with it. A lot of them are kind of cool, but still a lot of them are very situational, conditional. Like there's just so much conditional crap that it blows my mind that you have a chance to do a chance of a chance, and then maybe you have a chance to have fun. Like it's just across the entire tree, all kinds of stuff like that. And with my character at this point, when I'm spamming enough and doing a lot of things, it's kind of reliable here or there at least, but I've got a very spammy build. What else needs to be said? So you're very reliant on cooldowns, you're very reliant on the same defensive all Sorcs are, and you have to spam your cooldown reduction. Your armor's always going to kind of suck because you don't have bonus armor pretty much anywhere, so I'm trying my best to get some up, but it might not be worth doing. Your int and your resists definitely suck. Some of the uniques I've seen are just trash, and most legendary powers basically have a drawback to them, so you can change some sort of aspect of how your build will work or how your skill will work, but then it'll deal way less damage. So in this case, I mean, it's kind of worth for the Ball Lightning, but yeah, it just sucks seeing almost all of them have some sort of downside to them as well. But it's largely about the conditionals. So like dealing all this extra damage to things that are any of this, if it's not any of that, it's really tough to do anything. And then, yeah, as far as the skills as well, some of them are just trash. Like, I tried Incinerate when I got to level 5 or something, and I'm like 10 levels higher than everything, so I've already full spec'd into some shit, which I shouldn't have access to, and it can't kill like a white mob. This is before you should have any scaling, before you should have any legendary powers. You should have a baseline of power to be able to do something. 1 chain lightning is going to clear like a screen. This will struggle to like tickle a mob for 5 seconds. It doesn't make any sense. So everyone's pretty locked into like ice shards, an arc lash, and a flame wall build, from what I am aware of. Oh, okay. Yeah. Barriers are a huge thing for your build, and you're basically entirely reliant on barriers, which, I don't know, maybe it's fine. But I just feel like there isn't enough support for your vulnerable, for all kinds of elemental synergy, and, you know, maybe some burn and chill and stuff, which should, instead of maybe being down here, be on the tree. It just doesn't feel like it's supported enough to be what it should be reliably enough. So instead of like relying on everything being frozen, instead of relying on everything being stunned, there should be some other forms that you can get through the tree that gives you more consistent, reliable damage and isn't so goddamn conditional, so that you don't just deal damage on every second Tuesday at 2 a.m. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think there was plenty more Rant to go. Like I went into Sorc with a pretty clean slate. I'm going, yep, gonna enjoy another class and do my best to make it shine. And I have, but it was a bit of a struggle at times, and a lot of things left me going, I don't understand why that's a thing, or how I have to deal with this but not somewhere else. Like most other classes, I didn't feel this bad navigating the scaling systems on it. And I'd say fixing resist would be a large step forward, but then I think the Paragon tree itself and the powers that it generates are pretty bad and need help as well. Yeah, hopefully I didn't miss anything, but it was a pretty long rant, and I definitely think I missed down some stuff. If I did, I'm gonna write it back later in the comments or some shit. But this build's fun. Lash, can recommend. Sorc, not too bad in that regard. Just a bit weird up until the point it gets online. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.